Hello fellow fraggers, my name is FragPowers, and today we are going to be determining how good the new card Lilly really is. Since my last video on the update, I've had some time to play with her and to really figure out how to play her and how good she can really be. And since she's such a new card, I think the best way to show you guys how good she really is to compare her to another card that is already in the game, which is Dunkan. Now the reason why I'm picking Dunkan over any other card is because he's very similar to Lilly. He's got a very similar playstyle as her, so he makes a really good card as a comparison. On top of that, I think we can all agree that Dunkan is a very good card. I'm talking just around the top 5 best card to main in the game. So this means that he's a pretty good indicator of what it takes to be a meta card. In this video, I'm going to be comparing these cards together as best as I can in different categories, which I will link in the description below if you want to skip ahead. And I will talk about the good and bad points of each character for every category. So at the end of the video, I think you will all be equipped to form your own opinion on Lilly, but I'm pretty sure you will think that she's actually a pretty good card despite some players thinking she's not that good. So with all of that said, let's get into our first category. When it comes to playstyle, it's not very easy to rank cards from best to worst. Playstyles can be just different, and it's not because a playstyle is different that it's better or worse. Luckily for us though, and in my opinion of course, I think Lilly and Dunkan play in a very much similar way. I think they play optimally in long range, because they really have a good amount of damage in long ranges. Probably not like Zap Girl, I mean Zap Girl is from huge ranges, but they can really control 90% of the action in a game just by staying somewhere in the middle of the map and doing damage at long ranges. In an even level game, I don't think both of those cards are equipped to go very much aggressive on your opponent. They don't have the best HP and escape option to escape a situation. Now I'll talk about this later, but for now all you need to know is that they really excel in long ranges with somewhat of a defensive playstyle. Of course, when they have the opportunity to go on bunkers, both of those cards really work. It's just that they're pretty easy for a defender to get rid of once they are at the bunker. Of course, you can't play both of those cards exactly the same, but their playstyles are very similar. So this is why I think they can kind of be exchangeable when we talk about playstyle. Alright, second category we have, and we will start to see real changes, is the main fire. But still, their main fires are pretty similar as well. They both shoot projectile at a good range that inflict damage over time. Now they differ in damage and fire rate. Dunkan has a slightly higher fire rate, but his shots deal less damage. Now just to clarify, the clips you'll be seeing in this video are from my cards. My Dunkan is at level 12 and my Lilly at level 10 with no FragPowers. But when I'm going to be comparing them, I'm both going to be comparing them at the same level as much as I can. So bringing back to the main fire, Dunkan will do at level 12 a sum of 130 damage from one shot, which ends up being 180 damage per second. Now when we go to Lilly, at level 10 she does about 150 damage for one shot, but since her fire rate is lower, she ends up having 165 damage per second with her main fire. Now since we both have to compare them at the same level, we can add about 20% higher for Lilly on her projectiles, which means that she will do around 200 damage per second. So for the damage and just the damage, Lilly is slightly above Dunkan, and we already know that Dunkan is very good, so Lilly is going to have the upper hand. Now maybe it's worth mentioning that there's a difference in the fire mechanic. Dunkan will mostly do a lot of damage at once, and then the damage from his fire effect is going to be lower over time. And Lilly will deal about half the damage of her projectile at first, and the other half is going to be in the following seconds. So on this aspect, I would say that Dunkan is slightly better because it's always better to do damage at first as fast as possible than more over time. Because this means that if you're playing Lilly, your opponent is going to have a little bit more time to either grab a health pack or kill you. And it ends up usually either in trades, where you die but you also kill your opponent because of the fire effect, or you shoot one more projectile on your opponent that you really wouldn't have needed because the damage from the fire effect from your other projectiles beforehand have not been dealt on your opponent. Now these changes are relevant but not that important, and I think the DPS is the biggest thing we should look at, in addition to range, and range is also something related to your fire rate. Now both of these cards have an auto fire range of 45 meters. Now there's a real difference though. Lilly has unlimited range if you shoot manually, so your projectile will go as far as you can. Dunkan's projectile will stop at a high range but not infinite. It will stop at some points, and sometimes you won't be able to hit a card that is at a high range. So in the range department, Lilly has the upper hand. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about for the main fire is how easy a projectile is at hitting your opponent. Because obviously, not all projectiles are created equal, and we all know that a quarterback projectile is much harder to hit than say Andromeda projectile. And in this case, I think they're both at pretty much the same level. Now of course that's very subjective, and for one player it might be very much easier to play with Dunkan, either because of their practice with the card, or because just for some reason they just work well with Dunkan's fire style. Now there's two things that really differentiate them. First one is the speed of the projectile. In my opinion, you do feel like Lilly's projectile is a little bit slow when you shoot her. It takes a longer time to hit the opponent when you're playing Lilly than if you're playing Dunkan. However, I think there's a bigger splash damage on Lilly's projectile because I found it easier to hit your opponent in close ranges. Maybe it's just a me thing, but I think her projectiles are a little bit bigger, so if you're not too good at aiming, you might find it easier to aim with Lilly than with Dunkan. But since Dunkan's projectile goes faster, I want to place them at the same place for how easy it is for them to hit their projectiles. So with all of that said, which character has the best main fire? Well, in my opinion, it's Lilly. Of course, the only bad thing in my opinion with her is that her fire effect takes a long time to deal damage, but it's really not that big of a deal because she has higher damage and a little bit of a higher range in the cases that you'll be able to hit cards from long ranges. So Lilly is going to have a slightly better main fire. Now it's not a lot, but it's slightly better. So this means that she really has a good main fire because Dunkan also has a good main fire, probably one of the best in the game. Alright, so this one was a very long category. This one is going to go by very quickly. It's the category of speed and agility. I don't think both of those cards really define themselves as how agile and speedy they are. They're kind of average. But Dunkan is going to get the medal. He's much faster, on about 15% higher I think, from Lilly, but it does feel like a lot when you play him. 15% can go a long way. He's also more agile. I mean, he's not very agile, but his ultimate ability can be used as kind of a mobility boost, either if you want to get close to an opponent, or if you want to jump over some obstacles. Now, it's not a very good jump. You can barely do anything with it, and it's very hard to do. But you can still try, and if you master Dunkan, I'm sure you can do tons of sick stuff with it. So, Dunkan is going to have a medal for better agility and speed. Okay, now the next one is an escape option. Quickly said, this is the capacity of a card to escape a situation. It's very important to have for a good card because most cards in the top 10 have some kind of escape option or a good way to get out of a bad situation. It really increases how adaptable a card is and how often or how rarely they will die. So let's talk about Dunkan's escape option. If you have his ultimate ability, you will be able to use it to stun your opponent and deal damage to them, which means that you can either cancel an ultimate ability or just grab some time to go get a health pack. Depending on the situation, it can be very helpful. It's particularly a good ultimate ability for 1v1 scenarios because in a lot of cases, the other card will be completely stopped by your ultimate ability. Now, if you're one versus many cards at the same time, it's definitely not as good because you're really not usually going to be able to stun a lot of cards at the same time. They need to be really close together and it's kind of rare when you do it. Finally, Dunkan gets some more points because he's overall a faster card, so escaping is going to be a little bit easier for him when it comes just to speed. Now Lilly though, she has something that Dunkan doesn't have, her ultimate ability. In my opinion, it's one of the best escape options in the game. Essentially, it can deal a ton of damage at the same time. And when I say a ton of damage, it's different from a ton of damage from Dunkan. It's like 400, 500, 600 damage in a few seconds. So this means that if a card is chasing you, you will be able to use your ultimate ability to just usually kill them at the same level there's really only a few cards that can outlive Lilly's ultimate ability. She also does have an HP buff, which makes her also harder to hit while she's in her ultimate ability. So if you're playing one-on-one and the card is chasing you, if you use your ultimate ability, they will either have to dodge it and go away, or try to rush you and try to kill you before you're able to kill them. But it's usually not gonna happen because you can deal a super high amount of damage with your ultimate ability. In my opinion, overall, Lilly has a much better escape option than Dunkan, because it deals a ton of damage and she gets a little HP boost to stay alive a little bit longer. Bunker rushing is also very important in this game. If you want a good main, usually they're gonna have to do something good on bunker. This usually means either a good DPS on their main fire, which is the case for Lilly and Dunkan, or something really good with your ultimate ability that can do a lot of damage. Now let's talk about Dunkan first. If you didn't know, his ultimate ability can actually deal damage on bunkers. It's just not really reliable. You would usually much rather use your main fire. Good thing for him though, his main fire is very good. As you know, it deals a lot of damage. So at level 9, he can usually deal about 400 damage on a base in 15 seconds. Now when we go to Lilly though, it's completely different because on top of having a very high DPS on her main fire, she has the ultimate ability in the game that can do the most amount of bunker damage at once. It's absolutely insane the amount of damage that can get out of this card. I'm not kidding. If you use her ultimate ability on a bunker, you can see that she can practically melt the bunker in a few seconds. Now it does take some time to charge up your ability, and usually you're gonna have to switch to your main fire to destroy the bunker, but still, she's one of the cards that can get rid of a bunker the quickest in this game, I'm sure. For bunker rushing though, it's really not all we have to talk about. There's also speed that comes into it and how long a card can stay on a bunker. Because we all know that Blot is a much better bunker rusher than Jack El Padre, even though Jack El Padre has a higher amount of damage. Well, Lilly and Dunkan are kind of fragile cards. If you try to be too aggressive, you will usually get killed because they don't have that much HP to stay alive for long. Dunkan is going to have his advantages just because of speed, because he's going to be able to switch between bunkers or get to bunkers much faster. But even with that considered, I think Lilly is even better at bunker rushing, just because of her insane amount of damage from her ultimate ability. If you've played this card, you will know what I mean. Dealing 200 damage in one shot on a bunker is really something that no other card can do, and it feels amazing to do. Our next category is 1v1. And this is kind of a weird one when you think about it. It really depends on range. Now when I say 1v1, I really mean when you play your actual opponent. Not when it's against AI, but really the tools that you have to play against actual players. So Dunkan is going to be better, but in long ranges. Or in middle ranges, I would say. He can go and grab opponents with his ultimate ability, and it's really hard if you're playing against a good Dunkan player to not get hit by his ultimate ability and to just die like that. Now for Lilly, in long ranges, she only has her main fire, which is good, but it doesn't always cut it. In close ranges though, she's going to be much better, because at any time, she can use her ultimate ability, either charge it up to wait until they rush you, and then do a lot of damage at once, or you can use it just quickly, pop up, and do something like 200 damage, which is a huge help when someone's rushing you. Now, I wouldn't advise to use her ultimate ability to go and rush players. I know it's very tempting, and when I've started playing this card, that's what I was trying to do. But I realized that you really die often, because even though you get an HP boost when you're using this ultimate ability, you don't keep it afterwards. So if there are cards that are staying close to you after you've used your ultimate ability, it's usually going to be very easy for them to just get rid of you, because you don't have much left in HP if you had to use your ultimate ability as an HP boost to stay alive longer. In my opinion, Lilly's ultimate ability is something you have to use defensively. You usually have to wait until your opponent tries to rush you to use your ultimate ability, because either they're not gonna expect it, or they're not going to have the time to react if you use it when they're really close to you. Thing about Lilly is that she doesn't really have a high speed to catch up to a lot of opponents. So if you're trying to use your ultimate ability to catch up to someone, or just use your main walk speed, it's not gonna work most times. So probably don't do that. So on 1v1 though, it's hard to say which one is better. I would tend to say that Dunkan is slightly better, because he's usually able to use his ultimate ability defensively and offensively, but it's really not much, so I'm going to give both of them a medal for 1v1 because they're practically the same, like they're both very good at that. Alright, our next category now is you versus AI cards. It's how good you can deal damage to AI cards from your opponent and how quickly you can get rid of them. And this one is pretty simple. In my opinion, Lilly is going to be much better because her ultimate ability is way better to get rid of AI cards. You can usually one-shot them, and since you can see AI cards coming, it's easy to wait and charge up your ultimate ability, and then when they get to you, you just get rid of them. And even against like Luchas, she's able to do like 90% of their damage in one shot and then just get rid of them with her main fire. And her main fire, of course, is a little bit better than Dunkan, so with her main fire, she's also going to have an easier time getting rid of AI cards. Not to say that Dunkan is not good at getting rid of AI cards, but his ultimate ability doesn't do as much damage against a lot of cards at the same time, of course, and his main fire is slightly worse, not by much, but slightly, so he's going to fall behind just against AI cards, of course. Now, I think most of what needed to be said is said. All we need to say now is the few little changes that don't do much. First one is frag power. Now, the reason why I say it's a small change is because for most players, it's not gonna matter much because, I mean, I'm talking for me, like, I don't have a lot of frag powers, so they don't really give much of an influence on how good either Dunkan or Lilly is for me. For a lot of players that do spend a lot of money or buy the season pass, it's a big deal, kind of. Tell me in the comments if that's you. I don't know how many of you guys actually spend money on the game. I'm guessing it's less than 50%, so that's why I think it's not a big change. Still though, frag powers are going to be better on Dunkan. Mostly his first one, which increases his DPS by 30% for his main fire. So it means that his main fire, if you have his frag power, is going to be better at the same level than Lilly. Lilly has good frag powers, but they are all related to her ultimate ability, and I just don't think her ultimate ability is as good of a tool as her main fire. Her main fire is really solid and it does a lot of damage, guys. Her frag powers for her ultimate ability are solid, but they're not that crazy. Next one is Rarity. I guess you can argue it's a big deal, but in game, the only difference is a 30-second respawn time for Lilly instead of 22 seconds for Dunkan. If that was just that, I probably wouldn't have been talking to that because I really don't think it's that big of a deal. But there's only one thing, and now that's a kind of a big deal. It's because people don't get legendary cards in chest. And except if a card is really broken at level 9 or 10 against a lot of other cards in the game. If we're talking about legendary cards, so let's say Zap Girl, well then, yeah, she's going to be very important in the meta. But the thing about Lilly is, I don't think she's going to be that important, because there's a lot of cards that can beat her when you're at a higher level. She doesn't have like crazy range to outrange any card in the game. So an opponent that's playing a level 14 Andromeda against your level 9 Lilly, you're probably going to lose, because a 5 level difference is a big deal. So since people won't have a high level Lilly, it's very likely that she's not going to be as important in the meta as Dunkan. For a lot of people, Dunkan is really high level. I'm talking like level 14 Dunkans and 16s and 15s. I run into them all the time and they're really annoying to deal with. I don't think I'm going to have that problem against Lilly players because I'm getting the feeling that people aren't going to be spending that much money on her. So for Rarity, I guess you can call it Rarity, but it's really how high of a card she can be for other players. Dunkan is going to be better because for 99% of the players out there, their Dunkan is going to be at a higher level than their Lilly. Alright, so if you've made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching. I really think this will help you to see what place Lilly is going to be overall. But to conclude this, we have seen that both of these cards have their strengths and weaknesses, but if you want my opinion, Lilly at the same level is going to be better than Dunkan. Maybe somewhere in top 4 or maybe even top 3, as a main obviously. And overall, Dunkan does get some points on her because of his speed, but I really think that Lilly makes up for it in just sheer damage that she can deal. It's absolutely insane the damage that she can deal with her main fire and her ability combined. She's also very consistent. Obviously, Lord VR can also deal tons of damage, but you need the right card to copy, right? So Lilly does deal damage consistently because of her high range. It's pretty easy for her to hit her shots, and the way her ultimate ability that works in the close range and her main fire that works very well in long ranges, they all complement each other, and in most scenarios you will always going to be able to deal tons of damage, and it's very rare there's a situation where you're gonna try to get rid of a card and you're not going to be able to at least inflict some damage on them. So yeah, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this video. I think I mentioned every single thing there was to mention about the difference between Dunkan and Lilly, or at least my opinion on them. I try to be as objective as possible, but there's always going to be some things that are just subjective about Frag. So yeah, if there are things I missed out, definitely tell me. I want to be as clear as possible, and maybe I'll pin your comment if it's a big deal. So with all of that said, I'm not always 100% right on my predictions, but if ever Lilly becomes the number one card that is played in the game and becomes the new Zap Girl, you can expect a Lilly counter. I would say the best counters for now are Takeshi, Red Shadow, Stella, Archon, and maybe I'm missing a few, but I think those are the counters that you can run to play against Lilly players. Yeah, I think I've rambled on enough. I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you guys on Friday. Bye.